Hello and welcome back to Five Dolls in a House by Helen Clare. We're up to chapter 8, which is called Schools. Before I begin, I should probably explain why the view in the background looks a bit different. I'm in the same room, but I've had a reorganisation. I've got a new desk, and also I'm kind of living in a sea of Lego at the moment, so I've had to move things around a little bit, and my phone needed charging, so I've had to sit near to the socket, and that's why your view is very slightly different today. Actually, it's quite a lot different, isn't it? Schools. Here's a picture there. Elizabeth was walking up to the doll's house, having 3 guesses as to what they would be doing this time. And as it was a fine day, she went straight round to the garden, expecting to find them there. But the dolls were not in the garden, so she went round to the front door again and knocked. Nobody came to the door, and no wonder, for her own knock was drowned by the ringing of a bell inside, a long dreary ring like the end of the playtime at school. "What can they be doing?" said Elizabeth out loud. "I can't see nobody," said the monkey, "except Mrs. Vanessa, and I think the others must be out." "Well, they wouldn't be out without Vanessa," said Elizabeth, and she knocked again. And this time the bell wasn't ringing. "Come up once, you naughty children," said Vanessa's voice very crossly inside. "Where are you?" "I'm here," said Elizabeth firmly through the letterbox. "So may I come in, please?" "Oh, my dear Mrs. Small," said Vanessa, opening the door. "I'm sorry if I kept you waiting. You must have knocked just as the bell went. Do come in," she went on, looking very anxious. Her fringe was quite flat. She must have been having an argument. "Those tiresome dolls," she began, when Elizabeth was inside. "I told them that I should ring the bell at 4:15, and they were all to be ready to march in. And there's not a sign of one of them, and I've rung it 3 times. "What are you doing, Vanessa?" "I'm arranging about their schooling," said Vanessa with a sniff. "They're all so ignorant. Mrs. Small, you wouldn't believe. There's Amanda not knowing the difference between a spoon and a spade, or a bead and a seed, and there's Lupin thinking that you only turn somersaults in summer. Did you ever? She said to me yesterday. And Jane, well, Jane's not so bad on the whole. As for the paying guest, all she knows is French. So I arranged a school," she finished, taking Elizabeth into the parlour, "and got it ready. I even found a bell." Elizabeth recognised it at once, a little cowbell of her own. "And they've all disappeared." "Ringing and ringing she was for ages," said a voice down the chimney. "I was nearly blinded with it. Oh, that monkey! He's even more ignorant than the others. But he's nothing to do with me, thank goodness. What shall we do, Mrs. Small?" she finished rather helplessly. "Do you suppose they've gone out?" asked Elizabeth. "I should have seen them go." "Well, are they in the garden?" "No, I rang the bell round the garden like the muffin man." "Well, perhaps they didn't want to go to school," said Elizabeth. "Well, I dare say they didn't any more than I wanted to teach them," Vanessa snorted. "After all, it's hardly right for such a lady as I am to have to teach them. A duke's daughter, you know," she whispered. "But something must be done, and I cannot get a governess." "Is your father really a duke?" said Elizabeth. "Well, certainly he is. What's his name?" "He is called the Duke of Cranberry," said Vanessa, "and sometimes he's just called Crosby. My name is really Lady Vanessa Crosby. Those ungrateful dolls," she said, tossing her feather, "ought to be pleased to be taught by such a lady." "Oh, Vanessa," said a voice which sounded like Amanda's, "you're making it all up." "Shh, shh, shh," said several other voices. "Well," said Vanessa, springing to her feet, "did you ever? Hiding? That's where they are. I'll soon find them now." It took quite a long time to find anybody, however. Elizabeth and Vanessa hunted all round the room, under the sofa, under the table, behind the curtains. "I knows where some of them are," called a voice down the chimney. "The chimney," said Vanessa, and she darted to the fireplace and put her hand up. "Just look at this," she said, "full of legs. Full of Jane, she said as she pulled Jane out by her long green dress. After Jane came Jacqueline, rather black. Now where's Amanda? Said Vanessa triumphantly, and she stumped out of the room to look in the hall. Oh, Mrs. Small, said Jane, sounding rather ashamed. We don't want to go to school. Sorry ran up the chimney, explained Jacqueline. Vanessa must be cross because she's stumping to shake the house. She calls it making herself felt, whispered Jane. At this moment, Vanessa came back, leading Amanda by the ear. Amanda giggled and giggled. Under the stairs, Mrs. Small, said Vanessa sternly. I shall keep you in late, all of you. The dolls all screamed. But where's Lupin? Said Elizabeth. Why, I don't know, said Vanessa, and I don't care, she snapped. 4 is plenty for a school. 5's too many. I take it you come, Mrs. Small? There was no sign of Lupin anywhere. All the dolls trooped to their desks, which were chairs in a row facing Vanessa. Kneel down, children, she said, and they all knelt at the chair seats, and Amanda sighed. It's like being in church, said Elizabeth, peering through the back of the chair of Vanessa. Don't talk, Mrs. Small, please, she said. And everybody, look at the blackboard. It isn't a blackboard, said Amanda. Vanessa was writing on the back of a wardrobe, which she had turned round to face the class, with a piece of white chalk. Also, went on Amanda, determined to be naughty, what is a wardrobe doing in the parlour? I'd like to know. It must have got left here when we did the spring cleaning, whispered Jane. Silence! Roared Vanessa again. Silence, Amanda. And she wrote the date, 15th of July. Spelling first, she said. Now, Jacqueline, since you are French, how do you spell France? I do not know, said Jacqueline. How do you spell it? She asked sweetly. Well, if you don't know, said Vanessa, blushing very red, we won't have it. She doesn't know herself, jeered the monkey's voice down the chimney. Jane, spell bell. B-E-L-L, said Jane. Right, said Vanessa, and she wrote it down with a chalk. She went all round the class, asking everybody several words, but since she always wrote down whatever they said, and since it was often very wrong, Elizabeth couldn't see that the spelling lesson did much good. Counting next, said Vanessa, and she gave everyone a handful of beads to count. Here they are. You can see them kneeling at their desk chairs. They're just chairs, really, aren't they? But they're using the seat part as their desk, and so they've got to kneel on the floor. You can see the fireplace behind them as well, where some of them were hiding. Here you are, Jane. Mind now. Don't drop them. Don't eat them, Jacqueline. Amanda, stop playing marbles. It wasn't a very well-behaved school. What's the answer, Jane? 52, said Jane promptly, without counting at all. Amanda? 40. Miss Small? Wait a minute, said Elizabeth, who was the only person counting hers properly. I haven't finished. Well, I must say, you are rather slow. Mrs. Small, said Vanessa, but perhaps you are out of practice. It's 15, said Elizabeth. Quite right, said Vanessa, writing it on the board. How could you possibly know it's right? Asked Elizabeth. Vanessa's feather began to bob, and she glared rather crossly. 52, 40, 15, said she, writing them down. Add them up, Jane, and tell me the answer. We won't wait for that paying guest who is cheating anyway. 300, said Jane. Quite right, said Vanessa again. It's not, said Elizabeth. That's enough counting, Vanessa said quickly. We'll have French now. No, German. French is much too easy, she added hastily, catching Jacqueline's eye. What's good morning in German, Amanda? I don't know till you tell me, said Amanda, as I'm not a bit German, you see. Well, if you don't know a simple thing like that, I'm certainly not going to tell you, said the schoolmistress scornfully. You must find out before next lesson. You see how ignorant they are, Mrs. Small, she whispered. Now, Jane, get up and recite a poem. Jane stood up behind her chair and cleared her throat, blushing slightly. And there's no need to blush, you know, said Vanessa. You are not a lobster. Hickory, dickory, dock, began Jane timidly. You may go and get a drink of water, Jane. But I don't want a drink of water, began Jane. You do. You've got hiccups, said Vanessa accusingly. That's the poem, Vanessa, explained Jane. Vanessa snorted. Go on, she said, leaving the hiccuping bit out. And she turned her back on the class, which was a good thing, as Amanda was rolling beads backwards and forwards to Jacqueline. The mouse ran up the clock. What nonsense! How could it? The clock struck 1. 1 what? Said Vanessa crossly. I don't know, really, said Jane, but the last line says, and down it ran. Hickory-dickory-dock, she finished breathlessly. A most ridiculous poem, said Vanessa, what with all that hiccuping. And whoever heard of a clock hitting anyone? I'd like to know. Lupin, she finished, as Lupin ran in breathlessly from the garden. Sit down at once. Where have you been?
Oh, Vanessa, I couldn't hide any longer. I had to come and tell you. It's so nice. They're so sweet. Lupin's eyes sparkled. I've been playing with the horses, and they've got 6 babies, she gasped. What? Screamed Vanessa. Oh, I must go and see, said Amanda. Oh, do let's, come on.
And the whole school rose to its feet. It was sore with kneeling anyway, and rushed for the back door, including Vanessa.
6?
She shrieked. 1 or 2 even I could have done with, but 6? They all ran helter-skelter over the green velvet, Vanessa still clutching her chalk.
There,
said Lupin proudly.
Aren't they lovely?
Nestled up to the mother mouse were 6 tiny, tiny babies, very pink. Oh, breathed Jane, how sweet. But good heavens, Mrs. Small, 6 more horses, what are we going to feed them on? And where can they live? It'll be much too crowded in that stable for them all, you know. I'll have to make them another stable, and I'll bring you enough food, began Elizabeth, who was very pleased with the babies herself. But we can't keep them. I will not consent to keeping a racing stable, even if my father is a duke, said Vanessa firmly. Well, you must, until they're old enough to leave their mother, and you can have games with them and teach them things. Teach them? That I won't. It's bad enough teaching these ignorant dolls, snorted Vanessa. Come out, Lupin, she went on, and Amanda, you'll wake them up. And if they are babies, they need sleep and blankets. Shall we get some blankets, Mrs. Small? She asked, looking eagerly into the stable. I must say they are rather pretty pink. Perhaps I should bathe them. Oh, no, said Elizabeth, just leave them where they are. I'll bring some extra food when I come. I must go now. Don't let them get out, or we'll never catch them. They're so tiny. Oh, goodbye, Mrs. Small. Thank you so much for coming, said Jane. Call again, do, Mrs. Small, and meanwhile you can trust us to look after these young horses, said Vanessa, and she wrote, Beware. Silence. Young horses sleeping. There's her sign. She needs to work on her spelling a little bit, I think. She wrote it in large letters on the stable door with the white chalk. But we all know, said Jane. It's in case anyone comes who doesn't know. We can't have the babies woken up. Evidently she was tired of school and was going to make the best of a bad job. Elizabeth felt relieved. Goodbye, she said. The babies are lovely. Yes, aren't they? Said Lupin in a whisper. Goodbye, most genteel of you to call. We should be kept busy with these babies, said Vanessa. Elizabeth left them all gazing at the mice and the chalk notice and made her way round to the front. Some school, said the monkey. What, she don't know anything herself, that's clear. What are they going to do with all those mice? Keep them, I expect, said Elizabeth. There'll soon be dozens if you do, said the monkey. Dozens and dozens and dozens. And he waved to Elizabeth as she walked down the path. And that's the end of the chapter. Next we have my favourite chapter in the book. The Duchess comes to dinner. I love it. Hope you will too. See you then.